Hey, welcome to Friday at the Huddle. The weekend is almost here. I'm sure many of you are looking forward to it. The weather is changing a little bit. Spring is going to be on the horizon. Maybe some of you have spring break vacations planned and getaways. I know that Audrey and I are going to get away to Florida, take my parents down there and spend some time with them and spend some time with Audrey's dad. And we're excited to be able to go do that. So there's some hope on the horizon, isn't it? After a pretty difficult winter. Well, just the opposite is kind of happening in Luke's narrative. As for those that are watching the events take place leading up to the crucifixion, this is not leading towards the light, but this seems like the darkest hour. And it really becomes the darkest hour when Jesus takes our sin upon him and he's separated from God. But Jesus is going to now walk the path, the Via Dolorosa, towards his crucifixion and his death at the place called the Skull. So let's jump into our text this morning. We're in Luke chapter 23 and verses 26 through 32. As they led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and weep for your children. For a time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the barren women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.'" Once again, Jesus is prophesying about 70 AD. "Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when the tree is dry?" 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right and the others on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. And they said, he saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one. Now we'll talk more about the latter part of that tomorrow, or on Monday, I should say. But let's look at some of the events on the way to Golgotha. Now we know that crucifixion brings about a very slow death with really a maximum amount of suffering. It's a torturous death. It was also intended for the purpose of humiliation of those crucified by stripping them naked, exposing them in front of these crowds, with all of their death contortions to be displayed in public view. Some believe the Romans would allow Jewish victims a loincloth, knowing their feelings about nudity, but there's no documentation of this. Probably they wouldn't have cared. Because it was such a horrible form of death, Roman citizens were normally exempt from it, except in extreme cases such as treason or desertion by a soldier. And it was customary for those that were being crucified to carry the bar of the cross, and that was approximately 100 pounds, as the soldier led them out with a sign bearing the victim's name and crime. Jesus started out carrying his as he left Pilate's presence. Let's look at John chapter 19 and verse 17, where Pilate puts this sign upon Jesus, indicating his crime. John 19 and verse 17. "So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Here they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, 'Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews.'" Jesus had had a sleepless night in Gethsemane. Then he was beaten by the Roman soldiers. He was beaten over the head by the Sanhedrin. And it's just impossible for him physically to carry that 100 pounds. So due to the Roman occupation, they picked another man to carry Jesus' cross. And the man had no choice but to comply. And we find out this man is Simon of Cyrene. Now there's speculation that Simon became a disciple because of this encounter. But again, we don't exactly know. The disciples had been scattered by this point, but Jesus is not left without his supporters. Consistent with Luke's gospel, he points out that women mourned and wailed for him, and Jesus' comments towards them are not intended to be a rebuke for their compassion for him. Rather, he was simply indicating that while he was suffering a pitiful death, their own suffering later on would be more worthy of tears, for their suffering would be even more intense. And of course, he has in mind again that destruction of Jerusalem, where the horror would be so great that they would cry for the mountains to fall upon them in the city. And then Jesus says, for if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? In other words, if the Romans do this to someone who they claim is innocent, you should truly fear what they will do to those that they deem guilty, like the nation of Israel. And then, of course, Luke tells us that 2 other men were crucified with him that day. Well, I'm going to leave it there as we close out this week, and then Monday we'll start off with the events that happen at the place of the skull, Golgotha, where he is lifted up and crucified. Let's close in prayer today. The way to the cross, Lord, the way to the place of death and torment and torture, of exposure. You didn't have to travel that way, but you did for us. Now may we walk in your way, taking up our cross, willing to face humiliation and insult and pain and even torture and death for the sake of the kingdom. And we pray this in your name. See you on Monday, if not before. Stay great.